welcome to the NDTV Dialogues, a conversation of ideas. Tonight, our big focus, getting India back on track. Joining me on that is the Railway Minister, Mr. Suresh Prabhu. I'm also joined by the Congress Head of Communications, Randeep Singh Surjewala. I'm also joined by Derek O'Brien, Rajya Sabha MP of the Trinamool Congress. Also with me, Lord Meghnad Desai, well-known economist. Mr. Prabhu, thanks very much for joining us. We're talking about getting India back on track, but it's in a week when one of our four major cities has been devastated by floods. Of course, the rain was unprecedented, but the way the city has developed, the way the man-made reasons for these floods has also been a huge contributor. How could we talk about smart cities when the very basics aren't there in our big cities?
In fact, the smart cities answer to this very problem that you identified. You know, the unplanned growth of cities, the huge migration from rural areas to urban areas, which in an Indian context, you cannot just avoid it because people have a right under the constitution to go from one place to another. And also the unplanned nature of the whole issue is really the cause of this. So I think we really need to... But the smart city
doesn't address that aspect, sir. It looks much more at the digital network, smart, much more in a digital way than looking at unplanned growth or cutting down of forests, etc. Smart cities doesn't really look in the current format at that.
It actually should, and it is. In fact, you know, the concept of smart cities is not just confined to technology alone. It is actually speaking, how do you make the living standard of a city dweller far better than what it is today. So when you talk about living standard, quality of life, it involves so many things, including clean air, clean water, the type of vegetation, the green environment, also the soul of the city. Because you cannot have a city develop without a soul into it. The body could be very good, but if the soul is not there, what is the use of that body? So even the soul of the city, that means cultural issues, all of that should be ingrained into a smart city. So that is the concept. That's what the Prime Minister believes in. That's why we want 100 new smart cities to come up. Now, the challenge in case like Chennai and other places, which we have always been saying, that the West, which has emitted huge greenhouse gases in the past, has historical responsibilities because the today's climate change is caused by historical emissions. It is not caused by today's emissions. And therefore we feel that a sufferer, the victim of climate change is a country like India, whereas the cause is somewhere else. So we are saying we want to play a role. We want to make sure that the climate change is properly handled. We address that issue properly. But for that, there has to be a collaborative effort of those who have polluted it must pay for it. If they cannot pay for it, at least let us have an agreement, understanding about how we go about it. But India, for example, the per capita emission of India are far, far lower than the global emission, average emission. And
no,
therefore, it is
Mr.
really
Prabhu,
necessary.
I agree with you on that. In fact, there's been a rare unanimity in the UPA and the NDA on India's stand on climate change. But the fact remains that are we doing enough domestically? Maneka Gandhi has just said that India can't evade the fact that it is the biggest polluter, it's the biggest emitter of methane along with China and Brazil. And the fact remains that in a city like Chennai, when issues come up of in other parts, in Maharashtra, deforestation, the Western Ghat project in Kerala, which nobody actually looks at the environment because of other concerns. Even now when your clearances are being given, there have been questions being raised about how fast environmental clearances being given in the name of growth. You can't have both.
Yeah, but let us put this issue into perspective. First of all, India by any stage of imagination is not the largest polluter or not the largest emitter of greenhouse gases. We should go by the per capita emission. It is true that methane is one of the greenhouse gases. And largely the methane is caused, as per the studies, by one of the causes the water storages. So Brazil is identified as that is because of the methane which comes from the emission. But even methane emission in India are not as strong as other countries. So the point is very clearly that India must have a green strategy. We are already working on that. 100,000 of, that is 1 lakh megawatt of solar power, 70,000 megawatts of wind power, and all of this will change energy mix considerably. One of the principal cause of emission of greenhouse gases is energy itself. Energy and transportation are two main causes. So we are trying to address it like this. Also the clean fuel and other things will come in. The third part, what you are saying is very critical, is the forest serve as the carbon sinks. So if your forest, lot of emissions get absorbed into it. The other problem of deforestation is land use change causes about 15% of greenhouse gas emission. And if you deforest the land, that means you are changing the way the nature had intended the land used to be. So therefore mining and other causes also contribute. But at the same time, you must have a balance. Can we manage any activity in the country without mining? Whatever you can talk about is modern life. My mobile phone, my car, my train, my aeroplane, this is all coming from mining.
Randeep Singh Surjewala, come in on that. This concept of smart cities, climate change, as I said, there's rare unanimity. But when we look at what's happening, and because India is a federal structure, it happens in states, it happens in Congress states as well. In Kerala, in fact, the most resistance came from Kerala Congress leaders who said that we can't implement this Western Ghats project, and that whole report has virtually been thrown in the dustbin. Are we seeing now a kind of blind area of governance? It's not been looked at as a serious issue, but whether it's Kashmir, Uttarakhand, Chennai, we have to wake up to this, and Indian politicians have not yet.
I agree with that. I seem to disagree with Prabhuji when he says that 100 smart cities are the solution for urban planning. But let me point out there are 3,000 big and medium cities in this country. And if you were to include all towns, probably the number will be close to 40,000. Can 100 smart cities, even if we accept the argument, then by what time will we take the numbers to 40,000? It will take another 50, 60, 70 years, and we don't have that time. Jawaharlal Nehru Urban Renewal Mission was targeted exactly at what happened to Chennai. It was aimed at cleaning up the sewage systems, building new sewage systems, building exit points, ensuring that there was better planned development.
But Mr. Surjewala, in that sense, you've talked about their 100 smart cities, but the Jawaharlal Nehru Urban Renewal Mission has been talked about for years. And what did it achieve? I mean, the government may have done this in 1.5 years, but what happened before that in the 10 years you all had to do this?
I appreciate that. If you look at, we are not here, of course, discussing JNURM per se, but about 700 to 800 big cities did get grants from Government of India, backed by matching grants from the states, which turned them around. We must remember that the solution lies with the governors of the city.
I think that point is very interesting, Lord Meghnad, if I could bring you in. The governors of cities. So in a sense, it is bipartisan. It doesn't matter if you're Congress, BJP, JDU, Akali Dal. If you're a good chief minister, you can turn your state around. What this week, when you looked at reports, whether it was about Delhi pollution, whether it's a way which you've just flown in, so you've got a first-hand glimpse of a feeling of it, unlike us who suffer it 365 days. But when you look, whether it's Delhi pollution, whether it's what happened in the devastation in Chennai, and again, it's been a series of 3 states, what strikes you from an outsider's perspective? What's India getting wrong here?
You know, for a long time, cities have been the missing element in the governance. We have center, we have states, we have panchayats and all that. But cities, especially big cities, where land use is a really crucial thing. And basically my simple view is that people become municipal cooperators to grab land. Or allow other people to grab land. And we saw this in Kashmir, we saw this in Mumbai, we see it every month. As soon as monsoon starts, Mumbai starts functioning. So land use has been very illegal, constructions have been illegal, and we have unthinkingly created this problem of the governability of a city, or basically of the ability of citizens to go around. Because you may have very smart city, you may have very good transport network, but if it's flooding, you know, it's not working. So I think we need a serious thinking, maybe through Niti Aayog or somewhere, of how to reform urban governance, municipal corporations, their constitution, their powers, so that they become much more responsive to these kinds of long-run
But for instance, is air pollution a municipal corporation issue? Wouldn't it be a much larger focus on health and environment?
But you know, yes, everything is interconnected with everything else. But if we could regulate land use, and if we could encourage long-term investment in infrastructure of sanitation, as Mr. Surjewala was saying, you know, I'm sure that Chennai's infrastructure of sanitation has not been renewed for about 50 years. Mumbai is the same. So I think we need to be aware that what we do not see underground, sanitation and land use are two of the biggest problems cities have. And then the pollution and the climate effect are a consequence of our failure of governance.
When we look, Mr. Prabhu, I said getting India back on track, the interesting thing has been this week that there has been a welcome talk or a dialogue which has opened up between the government and the opposition. And GST, which you of course have been a major proponent of, seems a possibility that it may well happen. Why do you think it's so crucial, and what's changed between this session and the last? Why couldn't the government have made this outreach before? Why did we have to see a whole parliament session being disrupted? Did the Bihar results have something to do with this new friendly Prime Minister, conciliatory Prime Minister?
You know, if you recall, firstly, why the GST? This is a very important question. We need to bring in huge reforms into tax administration. The multiple locations and multiple places at which the tax, if a person or a transaction get taxed, it causes complete distortion into the collection system, and it's not even economically a right idea to do. That's number one. Secondly, India's tax to GDP ratio is pretty poor. Bringing in GST will plug the loopholes of tax evasion. It will avoid the multiple returns, filing and all that. So this is a merit for it.
Agreed, which the Congress argued for some years in
know,
power
and therefore
too.
I am very happy.
I agreed with that.
But such issues I think should be completely bipartisan, because this is something every year, last just year and a half ago they were ruling for 10 years. I'm sure we'll continue to rule for many more years. So what is important is, why not we therefore create a tax system which is free from corruption, transparent, efficient, payer friendly. That is very important. The payer of the tax must be really, don't have to file returns and returns. So one, I'm very glad that Congress and our ruling party, we are talking to each other, we are trying to take it forward. In fact,
why didn't it happen earlier? What changed?
It actually started, even the Prime Minister, if you recall, his first speech as a Prime Minister was that we want to work through consensus. His first thing was that I'm not a Prime Minister, I'm the Prime Servant of India. Opposition and ruling parties, we must work together. This is what I always believe in for many things. We have to, this is what in our DNA as NDA, is that we want to work with our other partners, and therefore we want to make sure that what is in the interest of the nation, we all work together.
You're also smiling, Mr. Prabhu, when he says it's our DNA. But Randeep Surjewala, let me ask you the flip side of the question. The irony of the fact that the Congress is the one who brought the GST, yet opposed it for the sake of opposition, there is a backlash to that as well.
Well, let me begin by saying I wish Prime Minister and the entire government was as magnanimous as Prabhuji is, and a lot of things would have been sorted out then. What happens is that power or loss of it humbles you down. It humbled us down in 2014.
It did humble you, because many would say that it hasn't really humbled the Congress.
Well, I think it did. We did a lot of introspection, and that's, I'm sure, discussion for another day of NDTV Dialogues. And we have thought things through, and we've realized where we made the mistakes. But between 2014 and now, we also saw, and let me remind you, for 6 years, we did not have insurance bill passed. 6 years, we did not have GST bill passed. The same proponents of GST today were its biggest obstructionists. That's also a truth of life. Congress didn't do so. We made sure that the insurance regulatory bill, which the government today tom-toms as one of the biggest attractor of FDI, then we ensured that it is passed. GST, we want it to be passed.
Will it be
we
passed
conceived
this
the
session?
bill.
Will the Congress pass it, agree to let it
Well,
pass this session?
whether it's TMC, whether it's Congress, whether it's left or other opposition parties, our stance is very clear. A GST has to be meaningful, it has to be implementable, and it has to be effective. A kill bill GST deal is not good for the country, it's not good for its economic growth. GST is important, I agree with Prabhuji, that GST is extremely important for the economy to grow and for things to move forward.
I want to bring in Derek O'Brien, because Derek, what's interesting, and I think that was the slight debate of words you had with the finance minister this week when you talked about cowboy constitutionalism, because it was interesting, and there's been this kind of debate about why should the Rajya Sabha be able to hold bills to ransom, as it were, and many questioning the fact that the unelected house gets, when a government has come in with a mandate of 282 MPs, overwhelming majority in the Lok Sabha, that a few good or bad men, depending on how you look at it, and women, can block a bill like GST. Even though the TMC, I know, supports GST.
I walked in late, so first let me make a little correction to, unless the Congress have now deputed themselves to be the Trinamool spokespersons, because we are not on the same page as the Congress are on the GST. Let me be very clear on that. We wanted the GST bill to be passed 6 months ago, but between the BJP and the Congress, when one was in government, the other was in opposition, they have made the GST into, you know what GST stands for, of course, for both of them.
Goods and service tax.
No, go slow tactics.
Okay.
Okay, this is for both the BJP and the Congress, because when the BJP was in opposition, they went go slow. Now the Congress has come, go slow. And the regional parties have been the most consistent in this. We've been the most consistent. We've said on the floor of the House that bring GST. Of course, it's not the perfect GST. It's not the perfect GST. So I think the Congress and the BJP don't need to blame anybody else. They need to work it out among themselves and bring it fast. Now to get to your question on constitutional cowboys, which I called the leader of the House. The reason I said that, because let me give you some examples, 2 examples. The first example of cowboy constitutionalism. Pandit Nehru, when he was heading a government, for every 10 bills passed, 1 was an ordinance. Janata Party, 70s, for every 10 bills passed, 1.6 was an ordinance. UPA, every 1.9 bills passed, 10 bills passed, 1.9 was an ordinance. NDA, every 10 bills passed, 3 are an ordinance. This is my first point. Why I called Mr. Jaitley a cowboy constitutionalism man is because now he is also giving statements outside the House saying that the Rajya Sabha is useless, they are blocking bills. However, having said that, we're happy with what the Prime Minister said in his speech. The Prime Minister after that came and clarified the importance of the Rajya Sabha. Yeah. So that's what the point of being of making the statement cowboy constitutionalism, because we think, because Sonia, we were discussing the Constitution, and the Constitution, the Constituent Assembly, which was set up in 1946, was actually a precursor to the Rajya Sabha, because they were all indirectly appointed, indirectly elected.
And brought in some of our brightest
Yeah,
minds.
imagine Mr. Jaitley lost the Lok Sabha election, we would have been deprived of his wisdom if there wasn't a Rajya Sabha. Wink.
I think Derek's solution is very simple and very good. He said, don't call it GST, call it GFT, go fast track.
But tell me again.
Mr. Prabhu is now only into track because he's now our railway minister. So he has a little bit of a one-track mind, but we won't.
But Lord Mayor, I just want to ask you that when you come, just one question. Does Indian politics sometimes amaze you? When you listen to this BJP Congress back and forth, and when you see the fact that a few people, whether you argue the Constitution, can actually block a bill which both actually agree on for over 1.5 years. Does this shock you, amaze you?
It shocks me very much, because where I come from, okay, I'm in a genuinely unelected house. The Rajya Sabha is not unelected, it's indirectly elected.
You're the House of Lords, yes.
Yeah, we are the House of Lords. We defeat government on amendments very often. We have many more votes on the floor, and then we have to consider the House of Commons. Now, the strange thing in India is there is never a vote on the floor of the House. Whenever it gets to that, the bill passes. And so the idea is, don't let the thing come to the floor of the House. That's a very strange way of doing legislation. So all legislation is done off the floor of the House. Compromises are worked out in some public accounts committee or some other committee. On the floor of the House, you know, the Telangana bill took so many years. About 181 amendments were debated in 17 minutes, and the bill was passed. It couldn't possibly happen in British politics. So what happens in India, consensus has to be built up outside the chamber, and then the chamber is just a drapery. So we need much more majoritarian behavior in India. that you know, a government has majority, it'll
majoritarian has many connotations,
I know what I mean. A government has a bill, they propose a bill, votes are taken on every amendment, and ultimately a government with a majority passes the bill.
Do you think it is time for reform? When you look at Mr. Jaitley brought that up, it's been discussed. Do you think that the Rajya Sabha, there do need to be reforms in this aspect, that the Rajya Sabha shouldn't in a sense hold the Lok Sabha or a popular government hostage?
No, absolutely. We have a convention that no matter how often we may reject an amendment, ultimately the House of Commons has the lead.
No, Sonia, may I butt in?
He'll just finish and I'll come back to you.
The House of Commons ultimately wins. And I think there's also a question of parliamentary behavior. We don't have a well to rush to. We cannot disrupt. We do not disrupt. And business gets carried on. In India, the strangest thing is business doesn't happen on the floor of the House.
I want to make 2 comments. One, I agree with what Lord Desai said. Disruption is not the answer. Parliament is debate, deliberate, legislate. And I think today last week in Parliament, we saw a good example where a BJP member said something, the Congress member got upset, and then those of us in the middle, and I think both the BJP and the Congress were both very gracious, and we got the Rajya Sabha to run. But this, I object to drawing a parallel between the House of Lords and the Rajya Sabha.
Absolutely.
Because except for 12 members of the Rajya Sabha who are nominated members, leave them out, the balance 220 members, we are all indirectly elected members. You need 50 MLAs who have been elected by the people, approximately 40 to 50 MLAs depending on which state, to come there. So this debate, which the leader of the House in Rajya Sabha, I think he got into it because it suits the BJP now. The reason I use the term cowboy constitutionalism is because you mustn't look at the constitution like that. The Congress representative is here, the BJP representative is here. I want to ask them, the founding fathers of the constitution took under 3 years to write our constitution. It's been 19 years, 1996, since the women's reservation bill has been brought here. A small party like mine, we're not actually so small, we have 46 MPs. Out of our 34 Lok Sabha MPs, 35% are women, 12 out of 34. So we should be giving less now. What should the BJP do? What should the Congress do? What should everyone else do? Even if we haven't brought the women's reservation bill, let's see some action. Bring the women into parliament. You know, because we have this easy thing. You know, these regional parties, they are not reliable. BSP, Samajwadi, Trinamool, they are a BJD. But I think we are much more responsible and much more reliable. And we truly can make it work. Action of women's reservation bill is a good example of making it work.